Kat, in her presentation, spoke about some of the push and pull factors for immigrant populations. And Jen, I'm wondering if you could sort of take that ball and run with it and perhaps define what push and pull means here and speak to how it factors into work with immigrant youth in particular.
Yeah. Yeah. So when we talk about push and pull factors, they are a way for us to understand the uniqueness of every immigrant story. There's no migrant story that is the same. My migrant story is very different than what my sister, Kat's family, went through. And so push factors are those factors that literally push people out of their home countries. And so they push people away from the land that they have known. And this could be because of war. This could be because, in our biblical scripture, we have lots of mentions of famine, right? There was a famine in the land, and so they had to leave. That would be a push factor, something that is really outside of their control, whether that is safety, whether that is violence, whether that is war, whether that is persecution. There's always a sense of I had no choice but to, right? And there's a movement of a push factor. Then we have the pull factor. The pull factor are those opportunities for something different, opportunities for more education, opportunities for employment, opportunities to be closer to family. There's all these realities as to why people move or migrate. My family was certainly one of the pull stories where there was this nominational invitation to come and plant ministries in Spanish. And so what happens when this lands with our young people is that oftentimes we only tell stories about the pull factors. Those are the stories that get highlighted. Those are the stories that get grandized, right? So stories like the ones of my family, where you had a family that was invited to come to the United States through a denomination. And that's the story that we often glamorize, that we often talk about. The push conversations are so often layered with pain and trauma and hurt and the sense of I had no choice but. And I don't know about you, but when I've had times in my life when I had zero control over what was happening, those are the stories I don't actually lead with. Those are the stories I don't start off with. And yet those are the stories that my body carries and that deeply affect the way I connect with myself and with others. So when we're talking with immigrant youth, it's important to recognize that there's a narrative of what we have said. These are the well-deserving immigrants, the immigrants that come from a particular kind of opportunity, that are quote unquote invited. And those are often the narratives that even students know. Those are the stories we can talk about. What we often don't make space for are those push stories. And in my Latinx immigrant church, those are the stories that elders had a hard time actually tapping into, because there was a layer of shame to it, and when we see these stories also in scripture, there was also layers of shame of like, we had to flee, we had to run. And when things feel out of our control, there's all this physiological and emotional response we have for it. And so one, I would say when we're talking with immigrant youth and all we're hearing is the pull stories, is the opportunities, the excitement, the difference, those are valid. That's a lot of my story. And what the church has a unique role to play is that our scripture is filled with push migrant stories where people had to flee, had to move, had to remove. And so what would it look like for us to narrate the biblical stories of push migration so that young people who've had experiences with this out of my control, the country changed, there was persecution, and we had to flee for our lives, to be able to narrate those as faithful responses to God's invitation. Just like I don't have lots of shame around my migrant story because it's a response to an invitation from a denomination. Migration as a means of grace means that any movement is a response to God's invitation to a new place, to a new land, to a new opportunity, whether or not government and society actually puts it that way. And so a lot of the work that I sat with migrant youth was to highlight all the push and migration stories in scripture and say, and did that make them less faithful? No, it did not. We can grieve the systems that led to that. We can lead the systemic racism or economic injustice that led for that push story to happen. But what I don't want is the students to internalize a shame that should be placed on the institutional realities that led to that displacement, and for them not to carry that in their own bodies and in their own relationship to self and to God. And so push and pull is really important for us to remember. And whenever we just hear pull stories, to also highlight how our scripture is filled with push stories and how to narrate that to young people so that they know that their movement is a grace from God to wherever they're landing. And God has always invited that. Whether governments choose to or not is a different question.